Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. Today we're tackling something really fundamental, the actual architecture of American democracy and, well, its economy, too.
Yeah.
We've got a stack of sources that really challenge us, to think about how our systems work and, maybe more importantly, how they could work better.
hmm
We'll break this down into, three key areas for you. First, electoral reforms, trying to get fairer elections.
Right.
Then those big economic shifts that affect us all. And finally, some really innovative ideas for how government could operate, including a fresh look at immigration.
That's right. We're going beyond just the headlines here, unpacking some fascinating proposals. And these aren't just, theories on paper. Many are already being tested around the world, actually, and even right here in the U.S. Ideas designed to make elections fairer, the economy more equitable.
More accountable government, too.
Exactly. More accountable government. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's unpack this.
All right, let's jump straight into reforming the electoral system.
Yeah.
And we got to start with one of the biggest, most persistent threats to fair representation, gerrymandering.
Ugh, gerrymandering.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the manipulation, the deliberate manipulation of electoral district boundaries just to favor one political party.
Right.
It distorts who represents us, it entrenches incumbents, kills competition.
Basically sidelines what people actually want.
Yeah, it's been around for ages, but it feels like it's getting worse, more sophisticated,
Yeah.
more damaging every cycle. It really feels like such a deep foundational problem.
It absolutely is. And what's often missed, I think, is why it's so stubborn. Why does it persist? Well, usually state legislatures control the map drawing process.
Right, the politicians draw their own districts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the party in power has every reason to rig the maps in their favor. That's your classic partisan gerrymandering. And even though the Voting Rights Act tried to deal with racial gerrymandering, that's still a huge ongoing issue, too.
So what about the courts? I mean, haven't they weighed in? They have, but the results are mixed. That's putting it mildly.
Okay.
The Supreme Court, back in 2019, Rucho v. Common Cause, they basically said partisan gerrymandering is a political question, meaning it's beyond the reach of federal courts. They kind of washed their hands of it, leaving it to Congress and the states.
Wow. That feels like a real dead end for reform then, doesn't it? So are we just stuck hoping states fix themselves? Which seems unlikely if they're benefiting.
Well, that's the crucial question. And surprisingly, maybe, despite Rucho, Congress does actually have power here. Clear constitutional power. It's under the Elections Clause. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution.
Okay.
It explicitly says Congress has the authority to regulate federal elections. That includes how House district lines are drawn.
Ah, so they could step in.
Yes.
Wow.
They absolutely can pass a law to standardize the procedures for federal elections. That's the key. The often overlooked lever for change.
Okay, so Congress could act. That makes these reform proposals much more interesting then. Like federal legislation mandating independent redistricting commissions.
Exactly. That's a big one.
These would be like genuinely nonpartisan groups with balanced membership. Equal numbers of Democrats, Republicans, independents.
Right. And they'd have to operate transparently. Public input would be required. Crucially, they'd be banned from using partisan data to draw lines.
And they'd use clear criteria, like keeping districts compact, connected, respecting natural boundaries, keeping communities together.
Precisely. California's Citizens Redistricting Commission is often held up as a model here. It really empowers citizens in the process.
Okay, what else?
Well, there's the idea of a National Redistricting Standards Act. This would set binding federal rules for any group drawing districts, whether it's a commission or a legislature.
So federal minimum standards.
Yeah. Things like no favoring parties or candidates, no intentionally diluting minority voting power, maybe even requiring competitive districts where possible. Some proposals even suggest using algorithms, with public oversight of course, to generate neutral map options, and mandatory court review before maps take effect.
Taking the politics out of it as much as possible.
That's the goal.
And to make sure it's all above board, I see this idea for a redistricting transparency act. This sounds like full sunlight. All the data, the software, communications, all public.
Yeah, public hearings before and after maps are proposed. And they'd have to write a justification memo explaining how the map meets the criteria.
Sunlight is the best disinfectant, right?
You got it. And taking transparency even further, there's this really innovative idea. Automatic map generation, using AI or algorithms.
Whoa, okay. How would that work?
Think about it. You have impartial, maybe open source algorithms create multiple map options based only on neutral criteria like compactness, population equality, VRA compliance. Then maybe a commission or even the public votes to select the best, most balanced map from those options.
So it really tries to strip out the human bias, the backroom deals.
Exactly. Reduces that potential significantly.
And one more idea here. A federal redistricting oversight office, like a watchdog.
Yeah, maybe an independent office, perhaps under the DOJ or a new agency. Its job would be to certify that state maps comply with federal standards, handle complaints, maybe provide technical help, and publish fairness scores so everyone knows how districts stack up.
A real watchdog, yeah. Okay, these all sound promising, but what are the roadblocks? Because clearly this hasn't happened yet.
Oh, the challenges are significant. Huge political resistance, obviously, from those who benefit from the current system, both parties when they're in power.
Right.
Potential court challenges, though again, Congress seems to be on pretty solid ground constitutionally for federal districts.
And the Senate filibuster. Always the filibuster.
That's a massive hurdle for any federal legislation, absolutely.
Right, it's not impossible. You mentioned states are doing things.
Exactly. That's the hopeful part. States are leading the way. California, Michigan, Arizona, Colorado, they all have independent commissions now with varying degrees of success and structure. Iowa has a unique, nonpartisan legislative agency model. New York has a commission, though the legislature gets final approval.
So it shows reform can happen. It's not just a fantasy.
Definitely not. It takes political will, often citizen-led initiatives, but it's possible.
Okay, so that's gerrymandering. But staying on electoral reform, another huge topic, often touted as a potential cure for polarization, is open primaries.
Yes, primaries.
Just to quickly recap for everyone, primaries are those first elections within a party to pick who runs in the main general election.
Right, and there are different flavors. You've got closed primaries, only registered party members can vote in that party's primary. Semi-closed let independents choose one primary to vote in, but registered party members are still locked into their own party's contest.
And then open primaries, where any voter can choose which party's primary ballot they want on election day, but they can only pick one.
Correct.
But the really radical one, the one that gets people talking, is the top two primary, sometimes called the jungle primary.
That's the one.
Explain that again. How does top two work?
So in a top two primary, all candidates, regardless of party, run on the same ballot. Democrat, Republican, Independent, Green, whatever. And simply the top two vote getters move on to the general election. Period.
Even if they're from the same party.
Even if they're both Democrats or both Republicans. Yes.
Wow. It is different.
It really is. And the potential genius of top two, the reason proponents love it, isn't just about maybe getting more moderate candidates, although that's part of it. It's about fundamentally changing the incentives for politicians.
How so?
Think about it. In a closed primary, who do you need to appeal to?
Your party's base. Often the most ideological voters.
Exactly. You hug the edge to avoid getting primaried from your flank. But in a top two system, especially in a district that isn't overwhelmingly one party, your path to victory in the general election might mean appealing beyond your base from day one. You have to talk to all the voters in the primary, independents, maybe even some members of the other party, because the top two finishers advance, regardless of party.
So it forces candidates towards the center, or at least towards broader appeal.
That's the theory. It could reduce polarization, weaken the extremes, empower independent voters, maybe increase competition, and incentivize coalition building. You might have to win over voters who wouldn't normally consider you.
Okay, where's this actually being used?
California and Washington state use top two for most of their state and congressional races.
Right.
Alaska does something interesting too. A top four primary combined with ranked choice voting in the general election.
Oh, that's another layer.
Yeah. Nebraska also has a nonpartisan legislature, which is functionally similar in some ways.
And some states like Texas, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin have various forms of open or semi-open primaries. But you're saying the majority still use closed or semi-closed?
That's right. The traditional closed or semi-closed systems are still the most common.
So if top two or even just open primaries have these potential benefits, why aren't more states jumping on board?
Well, resistance often comes from the political parties themselves.
They like control.
They fear losing control over who gets nominated. It dilutes their power. There can also be legal or constitutional hurdles in some states, meaning you often need a voter initiative, a ballot measure, to get it passed, bypassing the legislature.
Which is hard.
Very hard. And let's be honest, closed primaries often protect incumbents. They don't have to worry as much about challenges from moderates appealing to a broader electorate. It's a system that can kind of protect itself.
Could Congress mandate something like this for federal elections?
Theoretically, yes. That elections clause we talked about gives Congress authority over federal elections. So they could pass a law requiring open or top two primaries for House and Senate races. But it would face absolutely fierce opposition from both parties, likely. And almost certainly court challenges arguing it infringes on party rights or state powers.
So citizen-led initiatives at the state level are probably the more likely path.
Often, yes. That's how it happened in California and Washington. It bypasses the political establishment that might resist the change.
It's interesting to look globally, too. How do other democracies handle this sort of thing? Preventing extremism, encouraging broader appeal.
Yeah, good point. France, for instance, uses a two-round system for many elections. If no one gets a majority in the first round, the top two face off. It often forces candidates to broaden their appeal to win that second round.
Okay.
Australia uses ranked choice voting, which encourages candidates to seek second and third preference votes, often rewarding more moderate, less polarizing figures.
Right, we covered RCV before.
And Germany's proportional representation system ensures smaller parties get seats, which can limit the power of extremes and often necessitates coalition governments built on compromise.
So the common thread seems to be systems that force candidates to win support beyond just their narrow base.
Exactly. They tend to reward moderation and cooperation and make it harder for extreme voices to dominate.
And does the data show that open or top two primaries actually work in the U.S.? Do they lead to less polarization?
The research is, ongoing and sometimes debated, but yes, several studies suggest that systems like top two or open primaries do tend to lead to more moderate legislators, particularly compared to closed primaries. There's also some evidence they can increase voter turnout, especially among independents, and make those voters feel better represented.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? It seems like a pretty clear potential path towards dialing down the temperature. What stands out to you, our listener, about these ideas for fixing our elections? Okay, so we've spent some time digging into electoral processes, making votes count, making representation fair. That's huge.
Absolutely, foundational.
But what about the economic levers? The stuff that shapes our daily lives or opportunities just as much, if not more. Let's pivot there now.
Yeah, let's do that. We're looking at what one of our sources really vividly describes as a half-century pendulum swing.
A pendulum swing, okay.
For decades, American politics, particularly economic policy, has swung back and forth between, a more expansive, redistributive kind of capitalism.
Like the New Deal era.
Exactly. And then swinging towards a leaner, more market-driven, less government intervention approach.
The Reagan era and beyond.
Precisely. Understanding this big historical swing is pretty critical to understanding where we are now and maybe where we're heading.
So let's try and characterize those eras a bit.
Sure.
The FDR era, let's say roughly 1930 to 1980. You had the New Deal, Social Security, strong unions, big public investments like the highway system.
Right. Massive government programs, higher taxes funding them.
And it's genuinely kind of mind-blowing when you read it, a 90% top marginal tax rate at one point during that period.
Yeah. And the key thing, the surprising fact maybe, is that it didn't destroy capitalism, did it?
Apparently not. The economy grew significantly.
In fact, you could argue it fueled it in some ways. The insight might be that highly progressive taxes aren't just about taking from the rich to give to the poor. They can be an engine for collective investment.
Infrastructure, education, science.
Exactly. Things that create the conditions for broad-based prosperity. It really pushes back against the simple narrative that high taxes always kill growth.
Okay, then comes the swing. The Reagan era, starting around 1980, and our source suggests maybe ending around, well, now-ish, 2030 perhaps.
Right, and this era, focused on tax cuts, especially for corporations and the wealthy. Deregulation, a shrinking of the public sector, or at least the idea that government is the problem, not the solution.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that even Democratic administrations like Clinton's and Obama's largely operated within that Reagan framework, right? They focused more on, say, market-based solutions, technocratic fixes, maybe slowing the cuts, rather than pushing for huge new social programs or dramatically reversing the tax cuts. The fundamental assumptions didn't shift back entirely.
Okay, so why does our source suggest this Reagan era might finally be ending? What are the signs?
Well, the cracks are really starting to show. When I think about that CEO to worker pay ratio
You mentioned that earlier, yeah, from 20 to 1 back in the 60s.
to over 300 to 1 today, it's
Yeah.
just staggering.
It really makes you pause. How did we get here so fast? It's not just a number, right?
Yeah.
It feels like a systemic imbalance that so many people are just feeling.
Absolutely. That soaring inequality is just impossible to ignore anymore. And it's not just inequality. You see essential services struggling, millions still uninsured or underinsured, student debt crushing a generation, housing becoming wildly unaffordable in many places.
Yeah.
And then things like climate change or the pandemic, they really exposed how fragile some of our systems are, especially when they've been underfunded or privatized.
So people are noticing, especially younger generations maybe.
Definitely. They're looking at these trade-offs and genuinely starting to rethink if the Reagan-era consensus still makes sense for them.
Okay, this brings us to a really key quote from one source.
Hmm.
Big government isn't the problem. Bad arithmetic is.
Yeah.
Now, wait a minute. Isn't that just a clever way of saying we need more public spending, which is exactly what critics call big government and often attack as socialism? How do you square that?
That's a great point, and it really gets to the heart of the debate, the nuance. Look, critics often throw around the word socialism as a scare tactic, right?
Sure.
But mainstream progressive proposals today, things like expanding Medicare or making college more affordable, they aren't generally talking about the government taking over factories, state ownership of everything.
Okay.
The real question, the practical question, is about the fiscal math. Can these ambitious programs actually be paid for responsibly?
So it's less about ideology, more about can the numbers work?
Exactly. It's shifting the debate towards practicality, responsibility, showing your work. Can you demonstrate how you'll fund these things without bankrupting the country?
And the sources suggest the answer is yes. Where would the money come from?
Well, they point to several areas. Reinstating more progressive taxation is a big one, especially on extreme wealth. Billionaires who, as studies show us, sometimes pay lower effective tax rates than their secretaries.
Right. Closing loopholes.
Closing corporate loopholes, definitely. Ending wasteful subsidies, the classic example being subsidies to fossil fuel companies. And maybe reprioritizing spending, looking hard at the military budget, for instance, which is often larger than the next 10 countries combined.
So the argument is the money is there. It's just a matter of political will and making the math add up. If progressives can show that, they win on both morality and arithmetic.
That seems to be the argument gaining traction, yes.
Okay, but then on the other side of the economic coin, we have things like tariffs, especially under Donald Trump's economic nationalism. Massive tariffs.
Right. And it's really crucial to understand what those tariffs actually are.
They're taxes, right?
They are effectively taxes paid primarily by importing businesses who then pass those costs on to
Consumers.
Exactly. Especially hitting lower and middle income households harder as they spend a larger portion of their income on goods. Tariffs lead to higher prices. They can worsen inflation.
And that can make for an angry electorate.
Absolutely. There's historical precedent suggesting the party in power often suffers in midterm elections if tariff-fueled inflation is braiding consumers.
So, putting all this together, the potential end of the Reagan era, the focus on math, the backlash to things like tariffs, what does it mean for future economic policy?
Well, it points towards what one source calls the Mamdani moment.
The Mamdani moment. Okay, explain that.
It refers to the political shifts seen in places like New York City with the rise of figures like Zoran Mamdani, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Gotcha.
It's seen as kind of a signal flare for the nation. This emerging post-Reagan politics is described as being, well, unapologetically ambitious, socially democratic in its aims, but also laser-focused on policy with a calculator in hand.
Back to the calculator. Progressivism with a calculator.
Exactly. There seems to be this growing space, this demand for leaders who can both dream big and balance budgets.
So big ideas are okay, maybe even welcome again, like Medicare for all, tuition-free college.
They're gaining traction, yes, but their political viability, their path forward, really hinges on advocates being able to show exactly how they'll be paid for.
No more hand-waving.
No more hand-waving. Voters are getting savvier, I think. They might not mind big government if it actually works, delivers results, and isn't perceived as wasteful or incompetent.
But they do mind broken promises, fuzzy math,
Hmm.
deficits piling up with no clear plan.
Precisely. It's maybe less about big versus small government and more about smart, effective, and fiscally responsible government. That seems to be the shift.
Okay, fascinating stuff on the economy. We've hit elections, we've hit the economy. Now let's dive into two more areas, maybe a bit overlooked sometimes, but they could fundamentally change how government works and how we tackle a huge issue like immigration.
Yeah, these are really interesting. Let's start with a concept called reverse surveillance.
Reverse surveillance.
Yeah.
Sounds intriguing, maybe a little scary.
Huh. Well, it's not about the government watching citizens more. It's the opposite.
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine a world where basically every government dollar spent, every debate held, every bill proposed is meticulously tracked, maybe analyzed by AI, and then transparently beamed out to every citizen.
So citizens watching the government.
Exactly. Harnessing technology not to spy on us, but for us to hold governments accountable, which feels pretty crucial right now with trust in institutions being so low.
Okay, yeah, I can see the appeal. Why does this matter so much? What are the benefits?
Well, first, boosting trust through radical transparency. You see where the money goes, how decisions are made.
Cuts down on the what are they hiding feeling.
Right. Second, it could be a powerful tool against waste and corruption. Imagine AI flagging inconsistencies, like weird spending patterns, suspicious campaign donations linked to contracts, unexplained cost overruns on projects.
Like an automated auditor.
Kind of. And third, it could mobilize collective oversight. If lots of individual citizens get alerts about the same questionable thing, it can quickly turn into public pressure, informed citizen action. It empowers people.
Okay, so how would this actually work? What's the blueprint?
It starts with open budgets and spending dashboards.
Wow.
Governments proactively publishing detailed, structured financial data that machines can easily read and analyze.
Are there examples of this already?
Oh, yeah. Platforms like ClearGov are being used in states like Ohio and Missouri. Mexico has this impressive system called Quién es Quién. Tracking congressional spending apparently gets over 500,000 visits a month.
Wow.
Then you layer on citizen-led AI scrutiny.
Citizens using AI.
Yeah, think open source projects. Brazil had one called Operation Serenata de Amor that used AI to scan expense reimbursements for politicians. It flagged thousands of suspicious claims, led to hundreds of official complaints.
No kidding.
Nigeria has Budget and Tracka, platforms where citizens can track government projects in their local areas and report if funds seem misused or projects are stalled. Real people watching the money.
Okay, what else?
Transparent legislative debates, making the lawmaking process itself more open. There are civic platforms like Make.org in France or MayPLE here in the US that are experimenting with using AI to automatically summarize huge volumes of public comments on proposed laws, making citizen input more manageable and visible. The Interparliamentary Union sees big potential for AI here.
So it's not just about money, but the whole process.
Right, and participatory budgeting fits in here too.
Where citizens actually decide how some money is spent.
Exactly. Cities like Porto Alegre in Brazil pioneered this. Helsinki, Chicago, many others now let citizens directly allocate significant chunks of public budgets. Spain has a platform called Decidem that empowers citizens to propose, debate, and monitor civic actions being used across Europe now, direct democracy scaled up.
And all this relies on open data, right?
Mhm.
Governments making your info accessible.
Absolutely. Global open data ecosystems are key. Ghana's Open Data Initiative is a good example, making government data machine-readable. Groups like the International Budget Partnership push for citizens' budgets, simplified, accessible versions of complex government budgets.
Okay, paint a picture. What does this reverse surveillance look like in practice for, me, the average citizen?
Okay, imagine you have like a personalized citizen AI agent on your phone or computer. It constantly monitors government activity relevant to you, local spending, bills related to your interests, maybe a bill analyzer feature, scans new legislation, tells you what it does in plain language, maybe even compares it to similar laws around the world, flags controversial clauses based on global standards for, say, data privacy. You might get a smartwatch alert. Questionable expenditure of $50 detected in a local park's budget. Click for details. And it wouldn't just be passive. You'd have tools built in to easily vote on proposals, sign relevant petitions, or report suspected misuse directly through your agent, maybe connecting you with journalists or watchdog groups.
Like a personalized government watchdog right in your pocket.
That's the vision.
But there have to be challenges, right?
Yeah.
This sounds great, but also complex.
Oh, absolutely real challenges. Data quality and access is a huge one. Governments might release data, but is it accurate, complete, timely, in a usable format?
Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. Then there's equitable access. How do you make sure everyone can use these tools, that marginalized communities aren't left behind? Think about participation gaps we already see in things like reporting potholes online.
Good point.
And critically, privacy. How do you ensure citizen data used to personalize alerts isn't misused? And how do you prevent bias being baked into the AI algorithms doing the analysis? Huge ethical questions.
So the vision requires
It requires legal frameworks demanding real-time AI-digestible data releases from government, public-private NGO partnerships to build and maintain these open-source civic AI tools, maybe even mandatory citizen auditing modules built into government systems, and global benchmarking to compare policies and performance.
ambitious, really ambitious,
Yeah.
but potentially transformative.
Very much so.
Okay, from watching the watchers, let's pivot to our last major topic, rethinking migration. Specifically looking at guest worker programs.
Yeah, this is a really important one. The idea here is to find a practical, maybe more humane third path for immigration policy, something beyond just mass deportation on one hand or blanket amnesty on the other.
A third path, okay?
It starts by acknowledging the reality. Millions of undocumented immigrants are already here. They're deeply integrated into the U.S. economy, often doing essential jobs.
Right. Agriculture, construction, care work.
Exactly. So instead of just focusing on enforcement or ignoring the issue, this approach proposes regulating their presence, bringing them out of the shadows.
And we can learn from other countries here.
Definitely. A key takeaway is looking at global leaders, seeing what works and what doesn't. Take the Gulf states, for example. UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. They have massive guest worker programs. Expats make up 80, even 90% of the population in some of those places.
Wow. Mostly under that kafala system, right? Which hasn't always been great.
Historically, yes, the kafala system tied a worker's visa directly to their employer, which often led to exploitation, poor conditions, inability to change jobs, big human rights concerns.
But that's changing.
It is. There have been significant reforms recently, especially in places like Qatar and the UAE. Introducing minimum wages, allowing workers more mobility to change jobs, setting up wage protection systems, grievance portals. They're learning and adapting.
Yeah.
So the successes are large-scale formalization, clear visa processes. The challenges remain things like limited paths to long-term residency, restrictions on organizing and overcoming that history of exploitation. But they are managing huge flows of workers legally.
Okay, who else? Canada.
Canada's Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, the SOWP, is a really interesting model, especially for sectors like agriculture. It's based on bilateral agreements with Mexico and Caribbean nations. It ensures workers get protections, health insurance, minimum wage. There are clean pathways for workers to return year after year, often building long-term relationships with specific farms.
So it's regulated, predictable, humane.
That's the goal, yeah. It seems to work reasonably well for both the workers and the employers in that specific sector.
And Germany.
Germany has experience integrating workers both from within the EU through freedom of movement and from outside. For non-EU workers, they have programs like the Blue Card for skilled workers, but also systems for lower skilled workers, often providing language training, help with housing, job matching. It shows how government agencies can play an active role in integration, not just border control.
Okay, so taking lessons from these places.
Yeah.
Why do guest worker programs make sense for the U.S. now?
Several reasons. First, sheer labor demand. As we said, the U.S. economy already relies heavily on undocumented labor in key sectors. We have shortages.
Demographics too, right? Aging population.
Exactly. An aging U.S. population means we need immigrant workers to fill jobs, sustain sectors like elder care, pay taxes to support programs like Social Security.
And they do contribute economically.
Absolutely. One study estimated undocumented immigrants contributed over $12 billion just in state and local taxes in 2022. Legalizing them would likely increase that significantly.
And then there's the moral argument.
Yeah, the moral imperative. Mass deportation breaks up families, devastates communities, causes immense human suffering. A regulated system seems far more humane. It looks like a potential win-win-win.
Okay, so if the U.S. were to design such a program, what would it look like? What's the roadmap?
Well, first step would likely be some form of legalization through documentation for those already here. Maybe a one-time registration window for undocumented immigrants who meet certain criteria, say, been in the U.S. for 2+ years, have a clean criminal record, proof of employment or ties.
And they'd get what? A visa?
They could receive a renewable, maybe 3-year guest worker visa or GWV. This brings them into the legal system.
Crucially, what about worker rights? That was the problem with kafala.
Absolutely essential. You'd have to guarantee a minimum wage, crucially, labor mobility, the right to change employers without losing your visa status. That's
Yeah.
key to preventing exploitation. You'd need an ombudsman's office specifically for guest workers to report abuse or wage theft safely. And maybe a portable benefits system allowing workers to accrue things like healthcare credits, pension contributions, unemployment insurance that move with them from job to job.
That sounds like real protection. Dignity.
That's the idea.
What about employers? What are their responsibilities?
They'd have clear duties, too. Mandatory registration to hire guest workers, regular audits, proper contracts outlining wages and conditions, proof of timely wage payment, mandatory use of E-Verify, perhaps linked to a biometric ID to ensure they're hiring legally documented workers.
So accountability on both sides. And you mentioned a biometric ID, digital infrastructure.
Yeah, that seems pretty critical to making a large-scale program work efficiently and securely. A secure digital ID card, maybe linked to biometric data like fingerprints that connects to their visa status, tax filings, maybe basic medical history.
Okay. Would this just be for those already here or new workers too?
It could potentially include pathways for new workers as well, but likely managed carefully. Maybe through sector-based entry caps.
Meaning?
Using real-time labor market data to determine how many workers are actually needed in specific sectors. Agriculture, construction, hospitality, etc. Set visa quotas based on those needs, perhaps adjusting them quarterly.
Yeah.
Avoid flooding the market or depressing wages.
And working with other countries.
Yes, building regional agreements, especially with countries like Mexico and Central American nations. Joint training programs, clear processes for circular migration, cooperation on repatriation if needed. Partnership is key.
Okay, the big question. Would this offer a path to permanent residency? A green card?
That's a really important and politically sensitive part of the design. The proposals vary. Some suggest that after a significant period, say 10 years of continuous work, paying taxes, clean record, there could be options. Maybe applying for a green card through employer sponsorship or a points-based merit visa, or perhaps a specific pathway for U.S.-born children of long-term guest workers. It might be optional, not automatic.
Gotcha. So summing up the benefits of this kind of approach.
For the U.S., brings millions out of the underground economy and into the legal tax system. Helps fill critical labor gaps, reduces the exploitation that thrives in the shadows, potentially enhances border control by creating legal channels,
And for the workers.
safety from deportation, access to basic rights and benefits, family stability, the ability to travel home and return legally, more power to push back against bad employers. It really seems to shift the logic from chaos and fear to clarity and regulation.
Okay, wow. We have covered a lot of ground today.
We really have, from electoral systems through economic ideologies, all the way to these innovative ideas about governance and immigration. And what's fascinating, I think, is seeing how interconnected it all is. You know, each piece, whether it's drawing fair maps or changing primary rules or creating smarter immigration policy, it all feeds into this larger picture of trying to build a more functional, more representative society.
Couldn't agree more. And linking it back to that economic pendulum, it feels clear that the old Reagan-era framework, while it dominated for a long time, it really is showing its age, showing its cracks. The question doesn't seem to be if change is coming anymore, but really what kind of change it will be.
Right.
So what does all this mean for you, our listener? Well, it means that really understanding these structural issues, these debates, these proposed solutions we've talked about, it's pretty key if you want to participate effectively in shaping whatever comes next.
And that brings up one final crucial question to leave you with. How does that ongoing swing of the economic pendulum, we discussed the debate about the role of government, taxation, public investment, how does that influence the political will needed to actually implement these kinds of democratic and social reforms we've explored? Think about how shifts in economic thinking might either pave the way for or maybe create new obstacles to the kinds of electoral and governmental changes we spent this time diving into today.